What drove young people to join the bandits?
Extreme poverty among the population, not having enough to eat.
These kinds of mafias or organizations fought for control of the markets, of the neighborhoods, to be able to launder their money.
Well, for illegal currency exchange, they give you 8-10 years.
Regards from St. Petersburg, and welcome to another video. I am next to the Cathedral of the Spilled Blood, a rather peculiar name, in a rather peculiar location as well, as you can see, at the edge of the canal, on the bank of the canal, in a place, not a common place for a cathedral of this magnitude. And the reason is that it was built when they ended the life of Tsar Alexander II. It was built in the same place where they ended his life. His son Alexander III built it in his honor, in his memory. It is one of the most impressive cathedrals you will see around here, in this beautiful city of St. Petersburg. But that's not the topic of today's video. Today, I want to talk to you a little more about a phenomenon that happened in St. Petersburg and other Russian regions with the fall of the Soviet Union. And it is the gangs of bandits in the 90s, the crazy 90s, as the Russians call them, Banditsky, de Bienostar, and more specifically Banditsky Peterburg. St. Petersburg was one of the cities with the most impact of these criminal bandit gangs. After the Soviet Union fell, they took advantage of the economic chaos, the lack of government authority, and also that the independence of the Baltic countries and the opposition from St. Petersburg made the city an excellent transit point for goods for export and import. And these criminal groups saw a business opportunity and take advantage of it. The young people of St. Petersburg and all of Russia, instead of becoming doctors, lawyers, scientists, they joined these gangs to make quick money in a time of chaos. In today's video, I intend to delve a little deeper into this phenomenon that occurred after the fall of the Soviet Union, specifically here in the city of St. Petersburg, so let's not waste any more time. Let's go. You can't understand the post-Soviet criminal world without knowing about the Zakone, or Thieves-in-Law, heirs of the pre-revolutionary Russian criminal underworld. Its members form a criminal society with their own laws, way of life, and a level of secrecy that has no parallel in the world. Their emergence dates back to the 1930s, when in prisons, inmates began to distinguish themselves by ranks and hierarchies, and the considered elite called themselves the Thieves-in-Law. All of them were united by the so-called Thieves' Law, which follows the following concepts, among others: complete rejection of external social norms and rules, prohibition of cooperating in the investigation of any crime and communicating with the police, judges, and other officials, prohibition of working for government agencies, attracting new young members to the underworld, being apolitical, not using weapons that have been provided by police or military, not having a wife or children, abandoning contact with family, having honest and respectful dealings with other thieves of the same rank. They also used their own slang, and in the 1960s, tattoos with meaning became fashionable, where the Thieves-in-Law would reveal their qualities. The initiation process into the group, known as coronation, had to be approved by other Thieves-in-Law. The candidate would request to join, and members would check his criminal background, to check if his exploits and crimes met the standard. The candidate would only be crowned thief-in-law if he met the requirements. These thieves-in-law thrived in the Soviet underworld, along with the figure of the underground vendor or merchant, who profited at the end of the Soviet Union by exploiting product shortages and smuggling. Not all bandits and criminals were thieves-in-law, but the boom they experienced in the 1990s, reaching over 1,500 in 1998, gives us an idea of the extent to which crime expanded in Russia. By the late 1990s, increasingly strict laws began to be implemented. They eventually won the battle and put an end to this criminal cycle that lasted an entire decade. Before we start this journey, we're going to make a quick stop to eat something typical from here. Hi, give me 3, please.
Here?
Yes, here.
Card or cash?
Card, thank you. Where can you eat?
in a free place.
I've decided to come here to a legendary place, which is also downtown St. Petersburg, to grab something to eat, you know? The typical ones. Ponchiki, they're like some donuts. No dough, similar to churro dough. Can we sit with you?
Yes, you can.
You don't mind if I record? The lady sits with me. How many are there?
There are 3 of us. Come here.
Well, now I have company here to eat with.
You came from Spain just to eat pishki? Don't they have them there? Yes, in Spain the food is really delicious.
Yes, but they don't have this. Excuse me. Well, to your health as always.
It's a pastry dish. Our grandmothers used to fry them in fat. Dough with yeast and some sugar fried in fat. And in Spain, what is similar to this?
We have churros with chocolate, although they are crunchy. Nice to meet you. I'm leaving. Well, what I was going to say before, this family got together, is that this is a typical Soviet place, open since 1958, if I'm not mistaken, where they only serve these pishki with coffee or tea. And it's a classic. If you come to St. Petersburg, I recommend you stop by here to warm up. If you like churros and this kind of thing, you'll like it. And here you can feel like you're back in Soviet times. All right, so we start this tour through Banditsky, Peterburg. I'm with Sergey, who will be my guide today. And we're going to take a little tour of the most important places that marked the history of the 1990s in the city of St. Petersburg.
What did these organized groups live off? They controlled the currency prostitutes, the smugglers, the cooperators, illegal businesses at the end of the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics. There was also control over a game that started in the late 80s. It was called Notorious. You would take some opaque cups and a bowl. They tried to fool the naive ones, like the truck drivers in Spain. This game, adding up all the points throughout the city, brought in 10,000 rubles a day. If you wanted to buy a Zhiguli Model 6 car honestly, you had to get on a waiting list for 6 years, and when you finally got permission, then you had to pay 7,200 rubles. If you didn't want to wait, then you paid double 14,000 rubles. The average salary of an ordinary person ranged from 120 to 180 rubles per month. Imagine what 10,000 rubles a day meant. In the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, if you exchanged currency illegally, you would be sent to jail. Foreigners exchanged money at the hotel through intermediaries. They gave them the money inside a Matryoshka doll, and the intermediary paid so that they would turn a blind eye. If you could get 2 years in prison for smuggling jeans, then... Yes, that's how it was in the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics in the 70s and 80s. For a vinyl record too. It may seem exaggerated, but they would put you in jail for this. Well, for illegal currency exchange, they would give you 8 or 10 years in prison. As a tourist, you had to spend your foreign currency in the special stores made for that. The stores were called Abadul, only for foreigners. For example, a matryoshka that cost 50 cents on the street in these stores cost 25.
We just arrived with Sergei at...
Kirov neighborhood, Moscow Avenue.
Yes, Moscow Avenue is a neighborhood that was built right after the war. And well, it has that appearance that we saw in the other video, more like Moscow, not so much like St. Petersburg of the Tsars. In fact, in a building here lived the famous rock musician, Viktor, and according to Sergei, that's where he composed most of his songs, his hits. I'm sure those of you who are into Soviet culture and rock know him. The first stop of this tour is, as I said, here at the Kirov neighborhood, where I lived. Viktor Novoselov, a person that everyone knows, as Sergei told me, in the city of St. Petersburg, related to this criminal world, is a character who started in the 90s getting involved with the world of bandits and market control. Being in a position of power in the government, well, not a very high position, but not a very low one either. He was in the Department of Migrations. He controlled and granted migration permits. And at the same time, in the shadows, well, he was involved in controlling markets, products, and cars, even though he had control over these markets. What he always craved was power, according to what Sergei told me. And the quarrels between the groups of bandits made it so that in the year 93, in this very house where we are now, where he lived, he suffered an attempted assassination where he was shot 3 times. But he didn't die. He was left paralyzed. And he kept going with his activity, so to speak, although more and more focused on the government, on governmental action. Little by little, he wanted to get rid of this burden that his dark past, his criminal past, represented. And in the year 99, he held a press conference, and it was then when they ordered his assassination. You have to imagine that on this street, all these cars that you see here wouldn't be parked.
Finally, in the year 99, I had already achieved everything I wanted. I was a spokesperson for the assembly, a deputy, and I handled the affairs of the disabled in the city. Because of that, I already saw myself inside the government in Moscow. But he understood that he had to get rid of his past with the bandits. And for that, he decided to give an interview in front of all the media. And he began to incriminate the chief of police of the city, saying that while he covers for all the criminal, and he started naming the gangs. Everyone was surprised by what he was saying in front of the cameras. 3 days later, they fired the chief of police. And 2 months after this press conference, the morning of 99 arrives. He left his house in his Volvo down this same street to work. They got ready at this traffic light, and a pedestrian approached and placed a bomb with a magnet on the roof of the car, hidden inside a video home system tape. At that moment, the driver gets out of the car and starts shooting at the pedestrian, who managed to get into a car that was waiting for him on the other side of the street. The explosion was precise and ended Novoselov's life. On television, they discreetly announced that his life had ended. Most likely, it was a settling of scores. That's how the story of Viktor Novoselov ended.
According to what Sergei is telling me, the term Banditsky Peterburg, well, it was coined by the press, by journalists, because of 3 murders. That got a lot of attention. As I've been told, it doesn't really do justice to the city, because at that time, not only St. Petersburg had bandits, but it was something you could find all over Russia.
They were especially political assassinations. On August 18, 1997, the vice governor of the city, Mikhail Manievich. On November 20-20, 1998, the State Duma deputy Galina Starboitova. And the third one is Viktor Novoselov, which we just mentioned.
One thing mentioned to me, Sergei also just told me something very interesting that I hadn't heard before, which is that in the cemetery, the person in charge of taking care of the cemetery had access to information, very sensitive, that seriously compromised the bandits because many illegal burials were carried out. That is to say, when there was time, they were placed under the graves, and when there was no time, the other option was to do vertical niches between the graves, and they were placed there. So of course, when people gathered such information and could go to the authorities, well, they were eliminated directly to prevent any information leaks. What was interesting for the disease? To join? What drove young people to join the bandits?
Extreme poverty among the population, not having enough to eat, unemployment, low wages, poor condition of the population.
We have arrived with Sergei at another of the iconic sites of this criminal St. Petersburg. And this is the place where they murdered and ended the life of Vice Governor Mikhail Manievich. Here you have the plaque, which honors his memory. He left his house on Rubinstein Street, on the central Rubinstein Street, as you can see, full of classic buildings, characteristic of St. Petersburg. And in the car, he was with his wife and the driver. On an ordinary workday, he was heading to his office to attend some meetings, and he received some gunshots from a sniper, very experienced. The murder was meticulously planned at the corner where there is currently a restaurant. There used to be a fish market there, and that's where the 2 hitmen belonging to this group were, who were in charge of the daily surveillance of Manievich's car. Once he left the house, they gave the green light to the sniper, who positioned himself at the window across the street. When he stopped at the red light, the sniper opened fire. The main reason they killed him? Young vice governor, he was only 36 years old, was because he didn't want to sell part of the shares of the port of St. Petersburg to the bandits by refusing to take part in this corruption and this criminal world. The bandits ended his life.
The murder was committed with an unusual weapon, an automatic Kalashnikov 47 rifle, with a scope, which is strange because this weapon has a lot of spread. It was a miracle that they didn't take anyone else's life. A professional sniper was at work, possibly someone who returned from the Chechen War. If you look at the photos, all the bullets hit where Manievich was. If it had been a rifle, that would be one thing, but with an automatic Kalashnikov 47, that's a real feat.
We just passed by an abandoned prison by the riverbank, and Sergei is telling me, well, he mentioned to me that it had a peculiarity. The isolation cells were shaped like a cross.
The Crosses is a prison known in the city for having that shape, and it was closed recently. It was built by the Tsars about 200 years ago. No, I'm lying. It was about 150 years ago. It has the shape of crosses and a church in the middle. The conditions of the prisoners were monstrous at that time. There were 30, 40 inmates crowded into each cell. There were many infections and the walls favored tuberculosis. Now it's closed and they want to build a tourist complex.
Well, Sergei told me that this prison also appears in movies and very famous Russian series, for example, Siostry or Banditsky Peterburg, and there are also shows like Criminal Russia, in which, well, you can see how important or how well known this prison has been, right? And now, finishing up the itinerary of the Bandits of St. Petersburg. We have come, Sergei and I, to the Tarskovsky market, one of the many markets you can find around here in St. Petersburg, and that illustrate and give us an idea of how the scheme worked in the 90s with the markets and the bandits. These kinds of mafias or organizations fought for control of the markets, of the neighborhoods, to be able to launder their money. And everything was done through his organization, his mafia organization. So, if someone wanted to sell their things in the market, they had to go through them. That involved significant money and goods trafficking, as I mentioned at the start of the video. Well, with the fall of the Soviet Union, St. Petersburg became an important point for this flow of goods, and of course there had to be a market. As you know from the videos, I always like to walk around a market. Today, this one surely looks nothing like it did in the 90s. It's been completely renovated, as you can see. Well, it looks really good. I've come here as well, especially because, well, one of the many cases happened. That used to happen and occurred frequently at that time, here. Here, a group of 60 or 70 bandits in the year 92, who were fighting precisely for that control I mentioned earlier, came in and started a shootout, taking several victims, and left many injured. One of the many episodes that surround this legend, of the bandits in St. Petersburg. We can imagine how through these hallways, look, we can even find art and paintings. An antique shop, not just food. Also second-hand clothes, probably. These bandits, besides having control over all the sales stalls and deciding whether to let people sell or not, they also, of course, charge money for the right to do so. Every month you had to pay them your fee in under-the-table cash. And well, with these fees, they supported their organization. Through these fees, that's why they fought so much over the markets, because it generated a lot of money that supported their organization, later to control other types of businesses or other types of activities. Well, from this Soviet market turned into a modern market, well, in progress, I think we can end today's video here. And well, I invite all of you who want to know more, if you want to see this kind of excursions, to know that they are available because it's a story, a part of Russian history that is barely known, but is still important. Well, we're leaving with the Uzbeks. Bye. See you in the next video.